Awesome. So if you have your Bibles, you can turn to Genesis 39. We're going to read from verse 19. And 37 to start. My bad, church. I've made the mistake. It's going to be so hard for you to see, but I always grab this Bible, and you probably can't even see how small this writing is. And every time I tell myself I'm not going to bring this Bible again, but it gets to this time, it gets to a communion, and I have the smallest text. So I'm just going to do my best. But Genesis 37, verse 5, it says, "One night Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. 'Listen to this dream,' he said. 'We were out in the field tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine.' His brothers responded, 'So you think you will be our king, do you? Do you actually think you will reign over us?' And they hated him more because of the dreams and the way he talked about them. Soon Joseph had another dream, and again he told his brothers about it. 'Listen, I have had another dream,' he said. 'The sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed low before me.' This time he told the dream to his father as well as his brothers, but his father scolded him. 'What kind of dream is that?' he asked. 'Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?' But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father wondered what his dreams meant." Church, this is Joseph's promise. This is his moment where he's like, "I'm saying yes." And we're going through this as a church right now. And this isn't part of my notes, but when you get your yes from God, just be careful who you tell it to. I wasn't intending on saying that, but not everyone's going to be excited for what God has for you, and not everybody is going to want what is best for you. So be careful who you tell that. But as a younger sibling, if this was my calling, if this was my yes moment, I would just not even hesitate to be like, "All right, God, it's what you want." Like, I am the second youngest of 5 kids. So I'm like a long way down the food chain. So growing up was tough. You know, I wasn't even the oldest brother. I just had like Tiana, who you know. And it's like, you can't pick on Tiana. She's so sweet. And so like, I was essentially just the young child because there was like, you can't mess with Tiana. So if God came to me and was like, "Che, you will rule over your brothers and sisters," I would be like, "God, I know you're God, but just in case you're wondering, that has my tick of approval. I'm okay with it, and I receive it, and I'm just going to step into that fully." But this is a pretty cool moment for Joseph, you know, and it's a cool moment because it is something huge from God. It's something that was very different to what was going on, and it's a massive promise. And you know, we've been talking lately about this yes moment, and Jason was talking last week about listening, and we're all going to have these moments, and we need to be listening for them because God has a yes moment for you. But then as we continue on the story of Joseph, as we know, his brothers, they're off somewhere, and they see Joseph coming, and they decide that they're going to like kill him, and then they decide they're just going to sell him to slavery. And they throw him in the ditch, and then they sell him. And it's not a great thing for Joseph, and he ends up in Egypt at Potiphar's house. And then he's there. He's a bit of a young stud. He's doing his thing. Everything he's touching is coming up for him. Like God's got his favor on him, you know. It's awesome. But like I said, he's a stud. So suddenly Potiphar's wife goes, "How about that Joseph?" No, I don't know. That's completely out of context probably. But anyway, this lady, she wants to have sleep with Joseph, and he goes, "You know, he's given me everything, but you're off limits. Like, you're his wife." And so he refuses. And then from verse 39, verse 19 to 23, it's titled "Joseph Put in Prison." Potiphar was furious when he had heard his wife's story about how Joseph had treated her. So he took Joseph and threw him into the prison where the king's prisoners were held, and there he remained. But the Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. The warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything, and the Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. So this is like such a turn of events from where Joseph was originally, what he was promised from God. And I was like just sort of pondering the thought of like he was promised to be king, and then not too long after, like he had a bit of a taste, he was like going well, and then all of a sudden he winds up in prison. And I don't know about you, but prison's probably the furthest he can get away from what he was going for. He probably could not be any further. He's not even a slave. Like, he's locked up. Like, granted, he is ahead of the other prisoners, but you're still in jail. Like, if I could trade anything, like I would trade being over other prisoners in jail if I got my freedom. Like, he is in this place that's so far from everything that he thought God was giving him. He's so far away from everything that he was believing for, and he had been holding on to that promise, and all of a sudden he could not be any further away. And it's from this place that I want to preach tonight, and I've titled my message, In the Middle. What happens when there's a gap between where you are and the yes you've been promised? Or what happens when you're saying yes to God, but the person you are isn't good enough to carry out what he's given you? And this is something, and it's a season that I think that we all really go through at different points in our life. And the truth of it is like, there's nothing enjoyable about the middle in any circumstance. Like I said, I'm one of 5 kids. So car rides were the worst. And because I was small for my age, guess who got middle seat? This guy. So I see a middle seat now, and I'm almost getting like traumatic stress, just like, oh. I remember like one time we were coming back from like a massive drive, and mum turns around and looks at me, and I've got my older brother, so he's like 6 years older than me. So that's like a lot when you're growing up. So he's got his head on one shoulder, and Tiana's asleep on the other shoulder, and I'm just having the best shoulder workout of my life. My traps are on fire. I can't sleep because I've got nowhere for my head to go, and it was just like awful, but that was just a common thing, like just people falling asleep on Che. It's fine. There's just like nothing good about the middle. So I vowed to myself, Che, from this day on, you will avoid the middle seat. So you might be like, Che, that's a pretty big call. What happens when you're with your friends? What happens when you're going somewhere and it's a full car? I have developed a foolproof plan to the game Shotgun. Are we all familiar with Shotgun? If you call that, you've got front seat. You are riding in complete comfort. So I'm sure the boys here will sort of know my strategy. Jack was someone who was very good at Shotgun. Like, as soon as he would see the car, he's like, that front seat's mine, Shotgun. And you were like, ah. So what I started doing is, on the trips where it was maybe like Jack, myself, and Harry, it's just 3 of us, lots of room in the back seat. I don't mind the back seat. You can lounge out, spread out. It's probably better back there. I started going, hey, Jack, you have the front, man. You have the front. And then there was another time where it was Harry, Jack, Phil, and I, 4 of us, still no middle seat. I'd say, Phil, you're a big guy. You're a lot taller than I am. You need the legroom, have the front seat. And then there's a time after church where we find out that at Newsom McDonald's, it's the last place that does free refills. And we're like, well, obviously we need to go there. Jack, Jason, Nick, Harry, and myself are going to go to this trip up the coast. And you know what they're thinking? Che's going to let me have the front. Wrong. Shotgun. All right? So guess who got front seat? Both trips. I think I had it, but then on the way back, Jason got front seat. If you want to find out how he got that, you can ask him. It was gross. But hey, that's not my place to say what you did that night, but I've never looked at you the same. No, just kidding. Just kidding. But there is nothing good about the middle. And you know, we can find ourselves in this place in our life. We're so far from where we thought we would be. We're so far from where we thought God was taking us. And it's just an awful position to be in, but it doesn't mean it's not valuable. So tonight, I want to look at navigating the middle. And I just have a few points that I'm hoping to share tonight that really I believe will help some people. Because as I was praying into this, I really just feel like there's people here who, whether it be in between decisions to make or where you're going, where you already know where you're going, you're not getting there as fast as you are. And I really believe that this word tonight is going to help some people. But the first point in navigating the middle is God first, everything else second. And that seems like an obvious point, but I really believe that that's something for this house because it keeps coming up. You know, we don't talk about our notes, we don't talk about what we're saying, but yet this point always seems to be arising lately. We need to be putting God first. You know, we wouldn't put our shoes on before our socks. So let's not get other important orders out of whack. God is the God who created the world. He holds it in his hand. And as soon as we're starting to not focus on him, we're not walking in the full abundance and favor that he has for us. And And I think that this is important to know because I know that as you're here tonight, because you're at church, at the very least you're open or considering the idea of God. But it's easy to put God first in like moments like this. But what about when you're busy? What about when your kids are screaming their heads off at home and you've just got home from a long day of work? Do you want to read the Bible then, or do you want to go to bed? And that's not a place of judgment from me because it's something that in my own life I've had to navigate and work out, to prioritize this time with God. Like last year, I was at a time, so I was on prac for uni. For those of you who don't know, I'm studying like primary education. So I was on a 5-week prac and I was just teaching all the time. And my afternoons, I'd finish school, I'd come home, I'd start like prepping for the next day of school. And that in itself is like quite intense. But then I thought it would be a good idea to like maintain my 16 hours a week at that time at work with JB Hi-Fi. So I would go on Thursdays straight from school to work, to which I'd work till 9, get home like 9:30, sort of 9:45, and then I'd have to start my lesson plans for the next day. And then I'd work Saturdays as well, so I'd lose that day of planning. And then I also am not like super organized, and sometimes I leave my assignments to the last minute. And there was 3 weeks in a row where I had 3 50% assignments due, 3 Sundays in a row. And it was like the worst thing ever. And then obviously there was youth on Friday night. And then in the middle of all that was youth camp. So it was just like a time of my life where I was like, everything in me was like, God, I just need rest. But I made a decision, and I've made a decision for the last few years that no matter how tired I am, no matter how much there is going on, I'm going to put God first, because after that, everything else will fall into place. And I've seen that outwork in my life. Like after my first year of uni, I was doing the youth thing. I was just doing what I said. I was putting God first. And I was like, no matter what, even if it means I get no sleep, I'm just going to have my relationship with God. And outside of that, I'm going to do what he wants me to do. And I believe I'm called to youth. And I'm with those juniors for a reason. So I'm like, they're my priority. And after that, everything else will make a way. And, you know, like I was passing and I was doing all right. But my grades aren't like as good as my girlfriend Jess Earnshaw, who's just like, I'm pretty sure she owns QUT now because her grades are so high. But like my grades were all right, but they're nothing exceptional. And then all of a sudden in the mail, I get like this certificate to say that I've been accepted into this like society that's for like people in the top 10% of their uni. And there is absolutely no reason why I should be there, but I've got the certificate and they can't tell me otherwise. So God first. So, yeah, but Matthew 6, verse 31 says, "So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? What shall we drink? What shall we wear? For the pagans run after these things, and your heavenly Father knows all that you need. But first seek the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness, and these things will be given to you." You know, church, we can work ourselves to the bone. We can get so exhausted and so tired from working all these hours in the week, more than we're even required to. Or we can start putting some trust in God. Because if you're starting to put your time into kingdom things, God is in control of finances. God's in control of the situation that you're in. So why would you want to put work before God when God can bless you with more finances? And so, church, if you're in the middle, if you're in a season of in between, it's important that we keep putting God first, because it's his word as a light to our feet, a lamp to our path. And it's him that makes our path straight. And we need to be putting him first. If you want the full favor and the full abundance of God, prioritize him, prioritize your relationship with him, and he will add these things to you. So that's the first point. God first, everything else second, and it'll restore the correct order to your life. My second point is this: the middle allows you to lose the weight. So God loves you enough to get you where you're going and not let you fail. And so if God's going to promise, like Joseph, that he's going to make you a ruler, that he's going to put you over people, he's not just going to put you there overnight, because you're not ready. I'm not ready. No one would be ready for that transition overnight. And it's the same in our lives. You have the promise that God's given you. You've got the things that you're holding on to, but maybe the person you are right now needs to work through a little bit of stuff, because he needs to take some stuff from your life. He needs to trim the fat. He needs to help you lose that extra stuff that you're holding on to that you don't need for where you're going. He loves you enough to get you ready so you don't fail. You know, when Joseph was in prison, he was in there for a long time. He was there for a while, and Prison, you have a lot of time to think, I'm guessing. I don't know. I haven't been. Wouldn't that be a shock? I've been to prison, I know. No, I have not been. But like, I haven't been to prison, but there was a time where I didn't have a radio in my car, and I was like, just too much thinking time. It's like, it's a scary place to be, let alone just in prison, and you're there for like, oh, I could think of nothing worse. But the thoughts that would probably be going through his head would be like, how could my brothers do that to me? Like, they're supposed to be the ones who love me. Like, they're supposed to protect me, they're supposed to look after me, they're supposed to want what's best for me, but they've been nothing but jealous, and they've wanted my downfall for so long. And now I find myself in prison. Like, how could this happen to me? And I think that Joseph had his own stuff that he needed to work through. I think he had things that he would have needed to get through, to trim, or else he wouldn't have been able to rule in the way that he was. And you know, there's this whole thing with his brothers that before the drought and all this sort of stuff where they were not going to have any food, he has 2 kids. And he names the first one Manasseh. And it says, "For God has made me forget all my hardships and my father's house." So this is after he's got out, after he's interpreted the dreams, then he sat there for another 2 years. Then Pharaoh's had his dreams, and they're like, oh yeah, there's this guy who could probably tell you what's going on. He did it for me, and it worked out great for me. Meanwhile, there was someone who could not speak for themselves. But he named his first son, "For God has made me forget all my hardships and my father's house." And then his second son was Ephraim, and it's, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." And then he goes on to say, when his brothers arrive asking for their stuff, he's like, granted, he didn't handle it awesome, like he still put them in prison and stuff, but like once they find out who he is, he goes, "Don't be angry at yourself." Joseph is a far bigger man than I am. Like, you throw me in a well and sell me to slavery, like, I would say to my brother, like, enjoy being hungry. No, I love my brother. He's awesome. We've been through a lot. He just used to just wind me up. I was like that kid who just could sometimes get super angry. And one time, I allegedly threw an Xbox controller at his head. So, fun facts with Che. But the middle allows you to trim the fat. You know, are you holding on to things in your own life? Are there things that you're grasping onto so tightly because of the pain you've suffered, because of the events that you've gone through that might be holding you back from everything that God has for you? Are you in a season in the middle right now because God needs you to let that go to take you to where you're going, because it's in the middle where you can trim the fat? God doesn't want you to fail when you get where you're going. And sometimes we need to work through some things. And the longer it takes us to do that can sometimes make the middle a little bit longer. You know, Joseph got to a place where he wasn't angry at his brothers. You know, he provided for them. They got welcomed into Egypt. They got to pick whatever land they wanted. Like, they had it great. But would he have done that if he didn't work through this stuff? If he didn't have this, like it says in Genesis 41 verse 21, like when at first Joseph's throwing them in prison, they're saying, this is God punishing us for what we did to our brother. You know, they're saying, like, we saw the anguish in his face. We didn't listen to him when he pleaded. And so it's like Joseph didn't want what was happening to happen. And he had the right to be angry. But he still looked after them. He actually says, God went before us so that I could look after you. Which I think is cool. It's in the middle where God allows us to get rid of the extra baggage. So tonight, is there stuff that God's putting on your heart that maybe you need to start working through? Is there things that have just held you back, that have been your downfall, that have just been something that's just been a stumbling block for years? Is there something in your life that maybe it's time to let go of? Maybe it's time to start giving it to God. And I know it's painful and I know it hurts, but it says in Psalm 66 verse 9 through to 12, it says, our lives are in his hands and he keeps our feet from stumbling. You have tested us, O God. You have purified us like silver. You captured us in your net and laid the burden of slavery upon our backs. Then you put a leader over us, and we went through the fire and the flood, but you brought us to a place of great abundance. And I love the part of he purified us like silver. I've never worked with silver, but my dad, he works with like bronze sculptures and these sorts of things. So the process of getting something and melting down a metal is something that I'm kind of familiar with. I used to help him out. It was awesome. I used to make like the NRL trophies, which I just loved as a kid. But to get your bronze into your hollow shell of what the whatever the object is going to be, you have to melt this bronze. You have to melt it so you can eventually pour it in, and the bronze will run in and fill this empty shell, and it'll be what you've created. But as it's melting, as it's burning and going away, all this stuff rises to the top. I think it's dross. Is that right? Dross. Knew I'd get it wrong. Dross. And then my dad would scoop it off the top because it didn't need to be there. It wasn't part of the final product because they're their impurities. They're the things that didn't need to be there. And it's the same for us. Then we're going through a time where the pressure is on, where everything just seems to be so tough. It's a chance for the impurities in our lives to start rising to the top so God can be like, get that out of here, because it's not part of the final product that I have called you to be. It's not part of your future. It's not part of what I have for you. And it is time to deal with this because it is an impurity that's not for you. The time in the middle allows us to trim the fat. And my third point is this: use your gifts. The only bad gift God has ever given you is the one you don't use. You know, the giftings that God has put on your life are there for a purpose and for a reason that's specific to you. And I love the fact that God doesn't give bad gifts. I'm from a big family. I've had bad gifts. Has anyone just got the bad gift face? They've just practiced, and it's like, oh, yes, I did need this. Thank you. You shouldn't have. Oh, I saw one kid on Facebook who just had it down pat. He opens his present and he's like, oh, thanks, an avocado. And it's like, that kid had it down. But yeah, it's just I just get scared that my initial reaction is just going to be like, what is this? I don't need this. So before Christmas, you'll find me in my room practicing. It's just I don't want to be that kid they're do you like that? And I'm nodding my head and tears are coming down my face. That's not the person that I want to be. I'm nailing that face. Aw, thanks. Yeah, no. Use your gifts. And the reason why I say that is because it says in Proverbs 18 verse 16 that your gifts will make room for you. And this is true to Joseph. You know, he could have sat in prison. He could have sat down there and did nothing and just been down on his luck and being like, well, this is me. This is the rest of my life. I'm just going to sit here and do nothing. But people came along who needed dreams to be interpreted, and he didn't turn his back on them. We need to be using our gifts because that's what gets us through the middle. You know, if he didn't interpret those dreams, how would Pharaoh later on know that he could do it? His gifts made a room and got him out of there eventually. Granted, it was 2 years later. But the gifts that God has put on your life, on my life, on everybody, isn't just for the people when we get to where we're going, when we're getting to that place of yes, where God has promised us, but they're for the people along the way too. Those people need what God has put in you because they're there for a reason. They're there because the people that you encounter need to know God, and they are examples of them. We need to be using our gifts in the middle. You know, yeah, like I said, it was Joseph who interpreted the dreams and it got him out of there. So what are your gifts? What are the things that you should be fine-tuning? Because the perfect time to start practicing them and working them out and even sometimes getting it wrong is in the middle. Because that's what it's about. It's about getting ready for what's to come. So if you're in a season of in the middle, can I encourage you to start using your gifts? Because there's a whole world outside of this church building right now that needs them. There are people in your workplace, there are people in your schools, there are people at your universities or wherever you go through the rest of the week who need what God has given you. And they're never going to know his goodness if we as Christians don't start stepping out in faith and getting a little uncomfortable, like Pastor Julie was talking about the other week, and putting ourselves in that vulnerable state and be like, you know what, God, I can't do this on my own, but I'm just going to go for it because it's in that moment that God will change their life. We need to be using our gifts. We need to be practicing them. We need to be working them. If I could have the band come and join me, please. I recognize that the middle isn't a fun place. I recognize that the middle isn't always where you want to be, but it is necessary. And it's a season of our lives that at some point we will all go through, that we will all be tested by, that we will all have to endure. But it's not just to punish us, it's so God can refine us. It's so God can prune us and create us to be the people that he has seen in us, that he knows that we can be. You know, God didn't call us at this very moment because of who we are now, but he calls us because he knows who we can be in the future. He knows who we can be in him later on in our lives, but we need to start stepping out. You know, what I loved about Joseph and his journey through the middle is even though he wasn't satisfied, even though he didn't want to stay there, even though he probably wasn't having a great time and he was never satisfied with being there, he was always satisfied with God. Because God is always enough. God is always going to give you what you need if you put him first. He's always going to improve you because we never stop growing. We never stop becoming more Christ-like. And he's given you all your gifts for your reason. So use them. The only bad gift that God has given you is the one you don't use.